Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. It's nice to see a bit of a crowd gathering. So what is today's webinar about? So as many of you know, over the past few years, Meta has done quite a bit of research and also quite a bit of work on the issue of rodents, mostly in agricultural and rural settings. The main reason here is that we saw that they're having a hugely negative impact on food security and on food productivity, reducing yields, attacking crops while they're still standing in the field, but also grain that's being stored. So the issue is found throughout the food system. The structure of the event will be that I'll sort of introduce the topic now for the next few minutes. After me, actually we've had a swap in the schedule. I forgot to update this table. So after me, there will be Luika who will speak, and she'll talk a lot about the rodent issue within this rural setting, and also go into some of the details of ecologically based rodent management. We're calling that EBRM. After that, we'll have a talk from Dr. Mehretu Jonas, who's joining us from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia at the moment. Also, Luika is joining us from India. So thanks for making that happen. So Mehretu Jonas will talk about the bio-rodenticide that we developed in Ethiopia. That is something that groups of farmers, also in our project, particularly groups of women, can produce themselves, and it's been proven to be very effective against rodent pests. And then the third talk will be from Dr. Gauthier, who will talk to us about the rodent issue in urban settings, particularly across Africa in rapidly developing cities and slums, and the relationship between rodents and public health. After that, we have lots of time for questions and a bit of a discussion. So if you do have any questions throughout the talks, feel free to leave them in the chat box or take note of them. And then towards the end of this webinar, we'll have lots of time to address those questions, and you can discuss directly with the speakers by unmuting yourself. So this learning event is one of a series of learning events that's being organized through the Green Future Farming Project. And that is a 4-year program that is being led by Meta, RAIN, and Just Dig It. We formed a consortium together, and we are working in 3 distinct agroecological zones in East Africa. One of them being Uganda, where we work with coffee farmers on the hills of Mount Elgon. Also, there's quite a bit of barley production in that area. So this rodent management is particularly interesting for that. In Kenya, we work with pastoralists in the arid and semi-arid lands in the south, and that's a large-scale grazing land restoration being led by Just Dig It. And also in Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, we have 2 project areas, one of them in Amara, in the Gubalafto area, and the other one around the Middle Awash area in Oromia. And in both of these cases, we're sure that there is a rodent issue that is negatively impacting the productivity and profitability of farmers. So we're very happy to take lessons learned from other programs and adopt them into the GFF, just to help the farmers deal with this issue. So the project is based on 4 pillars: promoting regenerative agriculture, strengthening local value chains, and creating local economies based on circular principles. And the 4th one is learning and communication, which this webinar forms a part of. So what's interesting about the rodent issue is that by addressing this, it's such a cross-cutting issue that you actually are able to achieve all 4 of these pillars just by focusing on this one issue, by boosting productivity, reducing food losses, creating local value chains. For example, the bio-rodenticide can be produced locally, and circular principles. It's all produced with locally available materials, and with enough attention, it can be a fully circular system. So rodent management is not just about killing rats, but it's also got a lot of potential for spillovers and reaching to other themes that we work on. So that's what this slide is all about. Why are we talking about rodents in the first place? So the way we see it is that it's a component of regenerative agriculture because it involves producing more with less impact or even with a positive impact. And that's why we're focusing on ecologically based rodent management. So as you'll see through the three presentations, a lot of food we grow is actually consumed by rodents. In some cases, this is 15%. That's a global average, which means in some areas it's significantly higher than that. So this essentially translates to an inefficient use of agricultural resources, whether that's water, land, seeds, or labor. You're basically using all of this to produce food that is ultimately consumed by rodents. Beyond that, we've also seen in our research that rodent pests cause issues for nature restoration and conservation, whether it's threatening endangered species or reducing the success of tree planting by attacking the young seedlings. We also see these issues in urban development, which particularly in Africa is a big issue as these urban centers and cities are growing rapidly. And this all has implications for public health because, as we know, rodents are very effective vectors of a number of diseases. So considering all of this and seeing the opportunities in the issue, Meta has been working on this issue for the last 4 years. And now let's take a look at our speakers. So we'll be talking about rodents today. We have Osma here, and she's a project manager at Meta. She has a background in water resource management. She's currently based in Nepal, but previously in Kitui in Kenya, where she worked on rural water management for resilience, improving water buffering capacity. And also for the last 4 years, she has managed our rodent management project in Ethiopia, together with exploring other opportunities for rodent management in general. We also have Dr. Mehretu Jonas with us today, who is a consultant and researcher at Meta and also an associate professor at Mekelle University. He's one of the world's leading researchers on rodent ecology and ecologically based rodent management. So it's fantastic to have him here with us today and also as part of the team. And then we have Dr. Gauthier, I'm not sure how to pronounce your surname. I apologize for this in advance, but Dobigny? Perfect. Yeah, he is a researcher in health ecology at the French Institute of Research for Sustainable Development, IRD, and he's also an expert on the risk that rodents pose to public health, particularly in rapidly developing urban settings and slums. So he has a very interesting presentation prepared for us today. Yeah, I won't take up much more of our time because I'm sure our presenters are very eager to get started also. So like I said, if at any point you have any questions about any of the information being presented, feel free to put that into the chat box and we'll deal with all of the questions after the three presentations. Okay, Luike, whenever you're ready. I'll stop sharing.
Yes.
Hello, everyone.
Let me start sharing my screen. There we go. Ah, yes, here we are.
Perfect.
Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, so thanks for the introductions, Jean. Yeah, and welcome everybody. I'm happy to have this crowd, some familiar faces, people we work with, and some new people as well. So really nice to have this opportunity and share this with all of you. Also curious for your questions and discussion afterwards. Yeah, so in my presentation, I will briefly take you through EBRM a bit more generally, the background of it, why has it come to be, what are the issues behind it around rodents, what did farmers encounter when we work with them, and also the relation to food security. First of all, like Sean has indicated, Rodents have a major impact on food security. The main, or let's say the first impact, is on the primary food production. And it's globally. It's not only as you may think with smallholder farmers in particular areas in Asia. No, it's really going all over the world. So in Asia, Latin America, Africa, Europe, but also Australia, for instance. Rats are really a persistent problem that are found throughout the world. All types of crops. It can be cereals, but it could be pulses. They can even climb up palm trees and nibble from your coconuts. You can't think of it. Rats are involved and they can damage your crops. And as you see as well in this diagram, is that the damage is huge as well. If you look at the million tons of cereals that could be gained by effective rodent management, especially in Asia, this is really a lot. There's 53 million tons. What Neighbourhoods, a really leading expert in the field on rodent ecology, has shared in this report, and also other studies taking averages of the damage in Africa. They come to numbers up to 15% average damage. That includes standing crops in the field and stored crops in grain storages, silages, etc. So this is the global picture. Now, if we look at some of the countries we work in, you can get a bit more feeling of the numbers. Some example from Tigray, for instance, there the estimation is 9 to 44% of only pre-harvest yield loss, and that is to wheat and barley crops. So it's also quite a large variation because it also really depends on the seasons. It depends on the type of year you get in terms of rainfall, in terms of drought, in terms of how well your production goes. So the variety is quite large. So this could also mean that for some farmers, they may lose the entire crop. It's also possible. So, but generally, the characteristic of rodent damage is that it's very persistent. Like over the years, many different crops, there's considerable damage. For the farmers in Amhara, our team partly also present in our meeting, Tadesse and Kadachu, we found that farmers, they estimate the damage on 30% due to rodents only, and those standing and stored crops. If you do calculations with how much the impact is for their loss to income and also the loss to direct food subsistence for the household, this is enormous, and often it translates to a month of income, for instance, that you lose. So a substantial contribution to food security can be made with effective management. Just one other example also from Nepal. I saw also Sanjan Lapa is joining. He did part of this field work in Nepal. In Nepal, main crop is, or one of the main crops is paddy rice. And this is severely damaged, especially after harvesting time. Also comparable in terms of losses to farmers in Ethiopia. It ranges 1 to 2 months of income loss, especially for income generating crops. But also maize is largely damaged, millet as well, and wheat, which are also particular crops that are for food subsistence. So you may think, what's going on? We have a lot of damage, no action. What is happening? But there are multiple reasons, and mostly it's a combination of, firstly, rodents often go unseen. they are not species that like to be out in the open. Often they can be active at night. They go underground, etc. Second reason is there are different types of sociocultural beliefs around them. In Amhara, for instance, they are referred to as queen in the Amharic language. So it's also a type of, you're not speaking about them. It creates a type of taboo around it as well. Like, you can't touch them, you can't hurt them in a way. Furthermore, a big issue also that we found is that there's insufficient knowledge and means for effective management. That creates a type of lethargy. So we don't know how to deal with it, which leads to not dealing with it at all. And lastly, rodents are very clever, as I think we all know. They're very adaptive, and they have very high reproduction rates. So all these things, play a role in that management is really not a simple thing to do, and often is also lacking or sometimes neglected. But at the same time, there's a growing demand for rodent control with less reliance on chemicals and more specific targeting for their use as well. So for us, the main trigger was through working with the farmers in Amhara, as we did watershed management that led to great success and higher productivity in that area, multiple cropping seasons, moisture retention, etc. Basically, what happened at the same time was that rodents got a very nice habitat to live in, and there was food year-round, so they could thrive as well, which created, again, issues for the farmers, but then in terms of rodents coming to eat their crops. So this is what triggered us to get involved into EBRM and rodent management. And it also triggered us to see how can we integrate it into watershed management and common agricultural practices. So let's have a look at EBRM and what it is. So EBRM stands for ecologically based rodent management. I would say there are three main pillars. The first is the preparation. Second is on the approach, and the third, the core methods. Preparation is very important, and that deals with the proper understanding of rodents in their environment. So first, we have to understand their behavior, their ecology, what are the different species, what are their preferred habitat options, etc. We need that understanding to devise a management strategy. That is the first step. Also understanding the needs of the farmer or the clients. This is very, very different in terms of the type of farming system. For instance, if you compare conventional or organic, but also if you compare the scale of producers. If we have a large scale palm oil producer, let's say, compared to a small scale farmer producing mixed crops, maize, millet, etc., the needs are obviously very different. So those are two basic things at first. The second one is on the approach. There are three important things. We need collective action because rodents can move, basically. If we do it only individual, it's very easy for rodents to go to the next field, next house, wherever they may go. And it's also very easy for them to reinfestate, for instance, an area after a type of management is done. So collective action is key. Timing is also essential, and the essential part of timing is to do it in the lean season. That means controlling rodents before they get into reproduction. Because as soon as they start reproducing, basically, they become so many that it's really difficult to manage it. So managing it when the population is still few will have a much bigger effect into the numbers, let's say. So you can keep the numbers down much more. So timing is very essential. So before you start growing the crops, basically, before the food is all around. A third thing is a combination of measures. I will give some example of these measures, but also it's key that one measure solely implemented is very likely to be enough. So we need to combine multiple measures to really be effective. Then some of the core methods that are part of ecologically based rodent management. Yeah, first, I think quite logical, but very important. We have to reduce food and shelter, as those are the very two basic things that rodents need. So reducing access to food and shelter is a first thing. Blocking the pathways, destroying habitats. There are different methods, and also selected killing, but that is basically a last option. At first, we try to prevent rodents to be able to take shelter or to be able to access food. So here are some pictures to give you an idea what it looks like. There's some different methods. You see a type of fencing of cactus that is actually prickly, like it's just a literal fence for rodents. Also, you see a cat. There are other types of predators, natural predators as well, such as owls, very well known to catch rats and mice and other rodents. On the picture at the bottom right, you see a stone bund with beside it an open grass strip, open strip of land. That basically exposes the rodent to natural predators, especially raptors. And rodents don't like to be under threat of raptors, so it can restrain them from crossing to the field. And also you see part of EBRM is community training. It's training the watersheds and the farmers how to do it, and also to do it as a team. That's why also we, at least in Ethiopia, are working through these watersheds, as they are organized, they are registered, they already work together in managing the watersheds. So it's easy, and it works well to integrate rodent management into this package as well. So now just highlighting two specific examples to give a feeling of how like one method could work. The first example I'd like to give is on the community trap barrier system. The basic idea of this is to lure the rodents in with a very nice field of, let's say, barley that you grow before the cropping season. So you can do it about 2 to 4 weeks in advance. The rodents then, it's their lean season, so it's not yet the cropping season. So normally there's hardly any food. So they basically lured into this crop because they smell the nice barley. But then at the same time, you put a fence around it, and you only put holes in that fence that have multiple capture trap. So rodents will come to this specific field that is set off and fenced, and they will be trapped. So you will be able to really minimize or reduce the rodent population before you start your season. And this is also a method that could work for a larger area. So it's very successful in rice cultivation systems. Been practiced quite a lot in Southeast Asia, at least some countries like Malaysia, Cambodia. Recently, we have started trials in Uganda as well, to also see if it can be done in other geographies and other agricultural zones with different crops as well. So taking this method, which is highly effective in some places, and also testing it out for different uses and see if the target is still obtained. Second example is on storage. What you see at the top left is on the storage bags. You have so-called, there are multiple brands, but I'm common with the PICS bags, which is basically hermetic closure of a storage bag, so with an inner liner. This ensures that there's any smell that can go out, which makes that rodents are not able to smell the food that is inside, so they will not be attracted to it, and they will not start gnawing through the bag and eat your food that is stored. Initially, it was developed as a way to keep insects and other types of smaller animals out, but then it appeared it also works against rodents. And other examples are, as you see in the other pictures, are a type of rotating discs made out of a metal like iron that are put under the storage structure while the storage structure is raised. That makes that rodents cannot easily climb up. So otherwise it's very easy to them to just climb up along the sides or the poles, but this would prevent them to climb up and actually access your storage structure. So these are also local innovations that really help also to keep rodents out, and which we also try to share amongst farmers, but also across boundaries, across countries. And then also what is interesting and important is how to integrate these type of measures of EBRM into agroecology or regenerative agriculture. Because there are some measures that can be conflicting in terms of they may be good for conservation agriculture or, for instance, moisture retention, but it may also favor rodents in terms of, for example, allowing them food or allowing them shelter. For instance, if you do mulching, this can benefit rodents as you keep food available on your field. It depends on the farming system, but I think some options you would have is to mulch maybe in one particular season only, possibly mix in a crop which is not favored by rats, and you could possibly also use it as a trap, similar as the trap barrier system that I explained, but that would then happen after cropping season. But I mean, here there are some options to play around with. Another example is if you do no tillage, as rodents, or at least some rodent species, they dig burrows underground. And if you don't do any tillage at all, it means the burrows can remain intact. So you give easy life to rodents, let's say. So an option also is, for example, do a deep single tillage to break the burrows, but still try to retain soil moisture as much as possible. I think that two more general accounts on this. Firstly, try to rodent-proof your conservation agriculture biophysical structures as much as possible. And the second also, need to find a balance on your primary yield limiting factors for your farm. So on EBRM, what we developed is this practical guideline. It's there in 4 languages already for Ethiopia and Uganda, currently being developed also for Western Africa and also developed in 4 local languages there. We deployed this through the farmer learnings and the campaigns, mainly in Amhara and Ethiopia. So what we did there in Amhara, the EBRM campaigns, the Bureau of Agriculture had a big role as they trained all these watersheds, more than 60 watersheds in Amhara region, gave them a 2-day training on a range of measures. So it can be agronomic, related to the habitats, blocking movement, no food available on the fields, etc., etc. Some of the examples I also just mentioned. And the core was to have it as a campaign. So part of the training was also really to make an action plan as a watershed committee with all the members. How are you going to set this up? So many of the watersheds organized, for instance, weekly campaigns or bi-weekly campaigns. There were even bylaws being created. So for all the households, there were type of rules for joining these type of campaigns. And it really meant that these watersheds would go out to their communal grazing lands and do this with tens and sometimes even hundreds of people at the same time on a weekly basis. So it really made a big impact. And here I'd like to mention some of the achievements and the lessons from Ethiopia. The first and most important thing was on the awareness. Like I said before, one of the reasons that rodents are insufficiently managed is also because there is a lack of knowledge and skills on how to do it. So providing farmers, training them on these methods, and simple methods, like it was not, it was very achievable to them and very actionable as well. So this really created a sense of, okay, we can tackle this if we do this together. We can manage it. So the knowledge and the skills and the awareness really made the biggest change. That was the most important achievement and lesson. Furthermore, we also gained much more insight into the rat movements over the seasons because of these actions, the campaigns, but also the monitoring that we implemented. The farmers shared already quite soon, really early after the first implementations, that they could see an improvement in their grazing land and in their crops. They also replicated, they started training also other watersheds, and also other watersheds were requesting them to train them on EBRM management because they could also see the impact it made. And this peer-to-peer review and awarding programs that we set up also really credited the farmers. And we had some nice examples of local innovations of improved storage. So at the picture on the bottom right, you see this storage structure, which is a local invention by a farmer from Amhara. So it's also a raised storage and then using the corrugated iron sheets for it, which is now very popular, and carpenters are making this type of structure and selling it to farmers in that region. So if we take a more broader look at the big picture, the impact is fivefold. First of all, if you look at EBRM, the implementation and how this has resulted, the first impact is on the net primary crop production and the quality of it. Because not only is it reduced damage in absolute numbers, but also on the quality, because they can damage some crops or contaminate some crops. For instance, if you have food crops stored and there's contamination, it really loses quality, and it really impacts the food safety as well. So thereby also improving health of food crops and households, especially by reducing rodent vector diseases. Gauthier later on will share much more on rodents and public health. Third one is sustainable use of resources, because everything you lose basically to rodents, you can't use it for yourself. So everything you have put in, it can be natural resources in terms of water, land, but also inputs that you buy or need to pay for, like fertilizers or your seeds, but also labor. In principle, all of it is lost to sustain rodents in a way. So you can really make a big win into more sustainable use of these resources. What we also see is that this way we can create a momentum for shift in rodent management. Yesterday we were discussing also with a Czech partner, and even they were saying that yes, EU regulations are now being changed because they see rodents are building up resistance to anticoagulants, for instance. But actually, the regulations are too late because the resistance is already there, and already farmers do not have an alternative. So we see that really there is a high need to have this shift in rodent management. And we try also through these campaigns and the different activities in developing rodenticides to create more momentum for this shift. And at the same time, creating business opportunities, like Jean also gave some examples by it can be services for EBRM, so these type of methods to become really experts in how you do this, and for instance train your other community members or other farmers. But it can also be to deliver products, and that could be the bioidenticide, but it could also be, for instance, this storage structure that you innovate and can sell to other farmers. So there are quite some opportunities around it, especially looking at the local value chains. And just shortly, what do we offer as Meta? We are really eager and keen to take ecologically based rodent management the next level, to develop these packages for multiple countries, not only Africa, but also Asia, and to also really see how to integrate this in what we offer as for rodent breed management as Meta and a team of experts is to work a lot on inspection, survey, monitoring to increase our understanding of rodents. Then also tailoring these approaches to the local context, so depending on what you want as a farmer, as a client. Also research on the biorodenticides, which Merete will explain much more about, looking at storage specifically as it's a big issue, and also the outreach to a wider audience. So lastly, what I had was on what can we do together, but I think this can also be part of our discussion and the questions. So we like to link up with other sectors as well and really push this shift forward. So let me keep it here. Thanks all.
Thank you very much for that, Louisa. Yeah, as you indicated, there's lots of opportunities when we're trying to address this issue, particularly in the rural settings. Now I'm just going to check. Merete, were you able to join the new call?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. And you should also have permission to share your screen. So I'm not going to take up any more time and just hand the floor over to you so you can give your presentation.
Yeah, can you, yeah, I can't share my screen. Can you?
Yeah, I'll sort that out, don't worry. There we go. You should have permission now.
Yes.
Perfect.
Duplicate.
Yeah.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm going to talk about biorodenticides and related opportunities, and my presentation will be mainly based on the experience we have in Ethiopia. Recently, we were able to develop a biorodenticide, and I will try to share the experience, all the experiences we had throughout the development opportunity. So I have divided my presentation into 4 sections. I will talk about biorodenticides in general, some definitions, and then I will also talk about production, biorodenticides production, and then biorodenticides application, and finally the challenges that we have encountered and probably others who are thinking about developing biorodenticides might face and need to know about. Biorodenticides are also called botanical rodenticides because they originate from plant materials. We can use leaves, tuber, roots, seeds, and other latex and other parts of the plants for producing biorodenticides. And they are very much up to date in terms of their action compared to chemical rodenticides because they are very quickly degradable. They are organic in nature, environmentally friendly, and they don't have that much effect on safety issues on humans and the environment. And one of the other advantages of using and developing biorodenticides is because they can be formulated in such a way that they can be used for chronic action, meaning that you know, usually the chemical biorodenticides are formulated in such a way that they quickly kill rodents. On the other hand, if we work on formulating the correct biorodenticide, we can make them act chronically, meaning slowly, and preventing the rodents from conditioned refusal of eating the biorodenticide. So here I am going to provide you at least 3 advantages of using. I'm stopping now and then because people are joining the Zoom, and I'm admitting them because now I happen to be the host, I guess.
Mehretu, don't worry about that. I can also admit people. You can just focus on your presentation.
Thank you, Sean. Okay.
No problem.
So there are three reasons why we, in general, the scientific community consider biorodenticides advantageous over chemical rodenticides. The first advantage is the so-called bait unacceptance of rodents, because they encounter these baits for the first time in their life. And rodents, by nature and their behavior, they are very hesitant to test something new in their environment, and that is called primary bait refusal. And this is a very common problem while using chemical rodenticide, but by formulating biorodenticide in a correct combinations, this disadvantage of chemical rodenticide can be avoided. The second advantage is rodents, they first encounter the chemical rodenticide or any rodenticide for the first time, and especially when it is a quick action. If it kills the rodent very quickly, then they get used to it, they condition themselves. Then the second time they encounter the rodenticide, they refuse to eat it, and that's called secondary bait refusal or bait shyness. So this is again another disadvantage of using chemical rodenticide. The third one, of course, everyone knows that chemical rodenticides are very dangerous for humans, for other animals, and the environment. So if we can replace chemical rodenticide by biorodenticide, we can prevent the primary bait refusal disadvantage. We can also minimize the secondary bait refusal, and also the non-target harm of chemical and biorodenticide can also be an advantage. Then I will talk about the biorodenticide production processes. I think this is, as I said, from our experience while developing the biorodenticide in Ethiopia. The first step in biorodenticide production is sourcing plants, selecting the potential plants with a toxicity, deterrent, or repellent property either from the wild or from domestic environments. And then also try to search for traditional knowledge in farmers, in other communities where some plants are used for deterring or toxifying rodents. In addition to traditional knowledge, we also depend on literature. There are many scientific literature, ethnobotanical literature, which have investigated the toxicity and repellent properties of plants, and this can be used as a potential source of sourcing plants for production of biorodenticides. Then the next procedure would be preparation. We can prepare the biorodenticide as in the form of gas by extracting the bioactive equipment, the bioactive ingredients. We think a biorodenticide can also be prepared in the form of liquid, or can be in the form of gel and paste, and also in the form of solid. I think for our knowledge, as far as our knowledge is concerned, most of the biorodenticide, of course, there are few in number, available out there are either in the gel or paste form, or usually in solid form, either in powder or grain. Our rodenticide, for instance, is available in the form of powder. Now, for doing this, there are two important procedures. You can extract the active compound from the plant material by maceration, meaning that you can use different solvents like alcohol or water to extract the biorodenticide from the plant material. Or if you don't want to do extraction, then you can use the entire plant or the fresh part of the plant material as a whole, crush it, air dry it, and then use it for testing the efficacy and other important procedures. And the other one is testing and protocols for biorodenticide. The first test is conducted on palatability, whether the biorodenticide can be eaten by rodents, and also what other bait combination or base bait can be used. Is it a bread or peanut butter or oil, or or any kind of powder, maize, any kind of base material where the biorodenticide can be mixed so that the rodents consume as many as possible at one time. In our case, we have done the palatability test in both in the lab and in the field by using camera traps and also by providing different bait choices. And as you can see in this picture, for instance, we were checking whether linseed and rapeseed can be used as a base for mixing the biorodenticide. And it happens that in many cases, the linseed is more preferred by rodents, either also in the lab and also in the field. Here in the middle, you see a day active rodent, both of them feeding on the linseed and leaving the rapeseed, and then also night active rodents again eating eating from the same pot. And the other one, again, the next procedure is efficacy testing. Efficacy testing is like how good it is, how many animals die out of eating this biorodenticide, how many animals they get sick. And this is very important because there are international standards, American standards, European standards, and global standards. In our case, we focused on meeting the European standards. For instance, it says that whether you are trying the efficacy of the biorodenticide in the lab or in the field, then a minimum mortality rate of 90% should be recorded by the test animals. And then 30% of the biorodenticide has to be consumed, and not more than 10% of the control animals should die while doing the experiment. If the efficacy test meets this standard, then the biorodenticide is considered to be acceptable for utilization. I think in this picture, you see this is how we did the lab test for efficacy test, and we also did the field test in Amara. And finally, we have now the product named as Krr rodenticide, and this is labeled and it can be used by farmers because it meets the European standard that has been set. And as Luke mentioned earlier, this biorodenticide is being produced by women groups and as part of creating jobs and opportunities for changing the livelihood of rural women. And then the next step is shelf life determination. And once you produce the biorodenticide, then you have to make sure that for how long the active ingredient inside the biorodenticide remains active without being altered. So what we do is we store the biorodenticides at room temperature for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and so on, at every 3 months interval, and then repeat the same efficacy experiment to test whether the biorodenticide has lost its efficiency or efficacy as a result of storage of the product for some time. And we use the same procedure, the same protocol, efficacy protocol, to test in these different months, so that to make sure that for how long the active ingredient survives and remains intact before being spoiled. And then that also dictates the market opportunity. Once the women groups, they produce the biorodenticide, or once a farmer buys a biorodenticide, for how long can it keep in the shelf so that it can be used for 1 or 2 seasons at least. And then the last but not the least procedure for biorodenticide production is determination of non-target environmental harm. This is very important because this is also part of the regulation for European standard. You can use some animals like a chicken or some laboratory animals, guinea pigs, and so on, under strict control condition and ethical approval to test whether this biorodenticide has a side effect, harms the environment, harms the non-target species. For the environment, we usually keep the biorodenticide in the field in different soil conditions, in different environmental conditions, and then we will check how often it gets degraded and how fast it gets degraded, and then becomes part of the environment without harming the soil or the environment system. And again, we use the same kind of efficacy protocol, just like the rodents. The only difference is that we provide the biorodenticide based on the body weight. So the body weight of the non-target animals would be a little bit heavier, then the amount of biorodenticide can also be equivalently increased. In general, selection and efficacy, testing the efficacy of biorodenticide is not an easy step, to be honest. There are so many complex interplay of multiple factors they play. We have to adjust the environmental conditions should be taken into consideration, temperature, humidity, and so on, soil properties. There are so many safety regulations that we have to satisfy. There are also some technological constraints. And also the pest species involved, but there are so many different types of pests. The size of the pest species is different. Some of them, they don't eat plant materials. Some of them are completely herbivores. They only eat plant materials. Others mix plant materials with animal materials. So, and then the target route of entry, depending upon the biorodenticide you are producing. Is the biorodenticide effective by contacting some part of the body of the animal? Should it be ingested, or is there any kind of other mechanism? So these are all really very challenging parts of developing biorodenticide. But once you are able to control at least some of these factors, you know the environmental variables, you know the safety procedures, you know your pest animal, you know how the target biorodenticide is ingested or taken by the animals, then the production of the biorodenticide becomes very effective. I think Louis also shared these pictures earlier. In addition to formulation of biorodenticides from plant materials, some plants can also be used as a mechanism to reduce particular rodent movements. For instance, we use thorny farmers in many parts of the world. They use thorny plants to fence or to disrupt rodent movement in crop fields in residential areas. Sharp edge leaves are used in a row planting conditions so that they injure rodents. Itching plants also, they deter rodents, and there are also some growing plants with a complex root system that doesn't allow movement of rodents. These are really very useful. These pictures are taken from Ethiopia. I think this one and this one from Uganda. You can see how different methods are used. But in general, particularly in smallholder farming, these methods are very difficult because the farmers, they think they take space, and also they limit movement of other animals, for instance, predators and insects and so on. So they are not really used in massive scale in many parts of the world, but at small scale, they are very useful and effective in disrupting rodent movements. I will talk about application. Application of biorodenticide is very important, because in this case, now you see that this is a graph which shows increasing rodent populations through time. This could be cropping season, and this is the carrying capacity. The red line indicates the carrying capacity, meaning the amount of organisms or individuals that a given environment can support sustainably by providing resources, for instance, food and shelter. So this is how it goes. The rodent population increases through time very slowly, then exponentially. When it reaches the resource availability, it fluctuates, changes through time. And the change in fluctuation is a result of the change in the carrying capacity, food, shelter, and so on. So when we are taking any kind of rodent management action, like reducing the carrying capacity, for example, from this, lower it, and then also applying biorodenticide, it should be in the lean season. I think Luigi also mentioned earlier. The problem is many farmers and many crop protection experts, they advise farmers to take action when the rodent population has already gone out of control, and that is not really bringing the required result. It can only reduce rodent population temporarily, but a little later the population increases and the problem continues. So the reducing carrying capacity and then introducing biorodenticide or any kind of rodent management intervention should be conducted when the rodent population is very small. If we do this, then the rodent population becomes lower, and then the resources in the environment, as the carrying capacity becomes lower, no food or less food and less shelter, then the rodents will move into other places. On the other hand, if any kind of human activity, for instance, introduction of a new farming system and new crop, agroforestry and so on, is introduced to the agricultural system, and then the food and shelter becomes higher. Even though we take rodent management activity at lean season, once the carrying capacity has increased, it's very difficult to stop the rodent population growth, and as a result, even more rodents come to the environment, to the farm fields, and the rodent population increases. And you have this problem like this guy in the farm, where trying to kill mechanically the rodents, but they are jumping here and there. And this is one indication of increase in carrying capacity and taking rodent management action in the wrong time. So finally, there are challenges. As I said earlier, one of the challenges is producing species-specific formulations to avoid non-target harm. It's very challenging. If you have 10 species of rodents in your working area, it's very difficult to produce 10 different formulations. If you have some rodents which are eating only herbivores, eating only plants, and then there are rodents eating mainly insects, then this is also another problem. So you have to address this. There is also application challenge. I have mentioned the environmental and other parameters that need to be considered. And then ethical clearance is another problem for using, another challenge. I will not call it a problem, for using animals for exploitation. Identification of bioactive compounds, and some of the bioactive compounds in plants are really very small, very trace, and it's very difficult to identify them. And if you are using combinations of one or two or three plants, then the bioactive compounds from these plants, they need to be first identified, and then you have to find out how they are synergistically working. So that's not, again, another challenge. I mentioned licensing, patenting, marketing issues are very tight, and also sustainably sourcing plants from the wild is also challenging, because some plants could be rare and also have lower distribution. I think that's all from my presentation. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mehretu. Very interesting presentation. And yeah, it's great to see the progress that we're making with such an important tool such as the biorodenticides, and also how fantastic it is that it can actually be produced by the people who need it most, by the farmers with local ingredients. We got a few questions about this in the chat box, and we'll address those a bit later, but for now I'm just going to pass the floor over to Gauthier. So we're a bit behind schedule, but I know he has a very interesting presentation for us, so please, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Thanks, Jean-Marc.
No problem.
Can I share my screen, please? Not
yes.
allowed at the moment.
You can do that now.
Yes, that's it. Is it okay? Can you see it? Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see your PowerPoint page. Yeah, there we go.
Good.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot for inviting me to talk about rodents and related health issues. If you don't mind, I will make a focus on African cities, and more particularly on socio-environmentally degraded urban areas, where such problems, I think, should be exacerbated. As you probably know, urbanization has been rather late, but is now very quick in Africa, with 1.2 billion city dwellers who are expected on the continent by 2050. And moreover, a huge proportion of these people live and probably will still live in slums in some decades. And you can see it here on the right panel in red are the proportions of people living in slums out of those living in cities. So it's a huge and very actual problem. And as you guess, these slums are characterized by poor or no sanitation systems, poor or no waste management services, and together with very high human density. And so lots of food garbage and food stocks. And of course, this offers both board and lodging for rodents, which may proliferate and reach extremely high abundance. Of note, rodents in cities reproduce all year long, which is quite different from what is observed in the rural areas. It's an all year long problem, and there's no reproduction seasons that could be targeted for rodent control. In cities, small mammal assemblage are usually simplified. They are usually dominated by highly adaptive and highly prolific species, such as rats or house mice, which are both of Asian origin. And such species are also very competent for a wide panel of pathogens, of human pathogens. And of course, having many humans and many rodents living together in the same insalubrious habitats, that provides excellent conditions for rodent-to-rodent transmission and then rodent-to-humans transmission of zoonotic pathogens. And that's what makes cities hotspots for zoonotic emergence. That transmission is favored by the rodent meat consumption. You know, we talked a lot recently about wet markets and rodent consumption and wild mammals consumption, and they are not rare within African cities. This is not a rural thing. That can be urban too, but it can also mainly arise from very, very close interactions between rodents and inhabitants in their everyday life. I mean, in slums, rodents are extremely numerous. They are around, but also inside houses. They dig their holes within bedrooms, for example. They may even run on people when they sleep. They feed on their meals remains or on a regular basis. And this is very different from what is observed, for example, in cities from developed countries, where rodents may be as numerous, but they live underground, usually underground, in the sanitation systems. And this is different, of course, in slums where people and rodents live at the same floor. Rodents may be involved in the ecology of a wide range of pathogens that infect humans, and they are responsible, well, according to the World Health Organization, they are responsible for 400 million cases every year of human infections. Among the most famous ones, sadly famous ones, let's quote, for example, plague that decimated Europe in the Middle Age and that still kills thousands of people each year, most of them in Africa. Hemorrhagic fevers like Lassa fever, hantavirus fevers, which affect dozens of thousands of persons annually. Leptospirosis, at least 1 million cases and 6,000 deaths over the world each year. Typhus, which are probably extremely widespread, but for which no robust statistics exist. And a large series of poorly documented microbes that are usually responsible for neglected tropical diseases. And these diseases are usually associated with poverty in many developing countries. A particular risk consists in those pathogens that can shift from rodents to human, from rodent to rodent to human, and then human to human transmissions. Because that leads to a strong risk of epidemics, human to human epidemics. Plague, which is due to Yersinia pestis, or Lassa fever, which is a virus, are emblematic examples of such pathogens. In slums, the risk for such human to human transmission is favored by high human densities, of course, but also by low education levels and poor access to medical care that makes people usually going quite late to see the doctors. So that gives time for the epidemics to spread. Contrary to some ideas, slums are quite well connected to other urban areas and sometimes on long distance. And that opens the gate to exportations of human cases and subsequent wide-scale epidemics. They are not stuck, in these places and can spread around. Maybe a less well-known aspect is the potentially increased risk of antibiotic multi-resistance within cities that rodents may help to maintain or even stimulate. Indeed, in slums, poor sanitation, domestic and biomedical wastes, the unregulated or poorly regulated market of drugs, as well as the frequent treatment by antibiotics to a wide range of fevers, whatever they may be, may lead to the presence of a wide spectrum of antibacterial molecules in the urban environment. Although this is still poorly documented, we believe it's possible that rodents play an important role of incubators for antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And thus, if that's indeed the case, they would greatly favor the exchange of resistance plasmids, small molecules, DNA molecules, bacterial DNA, between bacterial species and strains. Let me give you an example. We did a small survey in Cotonou in Benin, and we found on several dozens of rodents that only among the rodents that were carrying gastroenteritic bacteria, which are responsible for diarrhea in kids, only 9 of these bacteria were non-resistant to antibiotics, but 34 of them were resistant, and 26 of them were multi-resistant, and they were multi-resistant to 7 out of 9 known antibiotic types. That's huge. I mean, that was quite kind of a preliminary results, but that makes us think that rodents could be critical in terms of bacterial resistance, antibiotic resistance evolution within cities. Last but not least, cities are hubs for transport, and as such, they are hotspots for long distance importation and exportation of invasive rodents and associated pathogens. That's essentially through maritime and road truck transports. And as a consequence, cities are expected to be critical places for epidemics to start and propagate, and places at high risk for emergence of new pathogens, for instance, through viral reassortments, admixture of virus strains or bacterial strains. Well, once all that is said, what can be done? Well, actually, the use of acute poisons and gas is, of course, not possible in cities due to obvious risk for inhabitant health. The massive use of anticoagulant rodenticides, which is usually done, actually rapidly lead to the selection of resistance. So after a while, you just select for generations of rodents that don't die after ingesting, anticoagulants. Anti-reproductive products may be promising, but remain to be, let's say, a bit developed. The use of traps or glues by inhabitants, they are frequent, but they may not be sufficient and pose sanitary problems through the manipulation of rodents by inhabitants, by people themselves, which are not supposed to be used to do that. And finally, the presence of natural predators in cities is quite limited, even if sometimes domestic cats are kept by inhabitants against rodents. But probably cats are not sufficient to remove rodents or even to keep them at acceptable levels of populations. In such a context, whereby community-based EBRM appears as an attractive and sustainable approach, since it should be a nice way to take advantage of local human resources, many inhabitants, and to optimize expenses. However, we know actually very few about how to do that and how to implement it in slum environments. Is it feasible? Is it efficient? Among other questions, that which spatial scales must it be implemented? How to enroll efficiently enough people for it to work? How to handle the possible associated sanitary risk in cities? This is a few questions I'd like to see briefly with you. As far as scale is concerned, well, our own population genetics results show that in various African cities, the rodent populations are extremely large, and this suggests that on the theoretical point of view, anti-rat campaigns should be conducted at a very large scale. And probably continuously because of continuous reproduction. So here, environmental management appears as the only solution on the long term. It's rodent control in terms of killing rodents seems quite difficult it won't be successful. Okay.
Sorry
You
about
need to
that.
enroll local people as much as you can. So you need to reach and inform them, of course, to gain their confidence. But that might be also a bit tricky in cities, and maybe more than in villages, where because in cities usually are populated by a mixture of social cultural entities, and sometimes with at least a partial erosion of some solidarity mechanisms. And it may be more difficult to identify local resource persons that can, lead the whole community and represent the whole community. And in general, it's more difficult to cover all communities and social groups. Another aspect are languages, of course, which maybe many languages could be spoken in the same area. So in the cities I've been working, it's not so easy to convince people to get enrolled. First, rodent-associated health issues are usually very poorly known by people. So there's a big job to do to raise their awareness for them to get involved on a voluntary basis. Or maybe it would be more efficient to rely on other aspects, on other issues that people actually recognize by themselves, that they know better. For example, they often testimony about damages on food stocks, furniture on their own houses, and these things actually, I think, should be used to try to convince them to get enrolled into a community-based EBRM strategies. Another aspect is that it is quite critical and quite really important that as many households as possible are indeed enrolled, since recolonization from non-enrolled households by rodents, of course, of the others, will decrease EBRM efficiency. And that also will lead to a general feeling of inefficiency and loss of confidence. And finally, that will lead very quickly to a loss of involvement in even of these people who were first motivated to get in. But on the contrary, having some punctual success in rat control or mitigation of rat-associated troubles may be quite useful in convincing the neighbors and having more and more people happy to work with all the others. Sorry. Another problem can be that enrolled but not sufficiently informed people, inhabitants, may pose various sanitary problems. First, during community-based EBRM implementation, the handling of rodents by people themselves may lead to increased rodent-to-human risk of pathogen spillover through direct blood, feces, or saliva contacts. Participative trapping campaigns may also represent a temptation for some inhabitants to cook and eat captured rodents, as sometimes happens in many regions. And in the case of promotion of some predators, such as I'm thinking of cats, for example, people just may face other zoonotic pathogens, which are, for example, toxoplasmosis, bartonellosis, are highly associated with cats and may pose particular problems if you multiply cats in households. This is something that must be kept in mind. And finally, a major issue corresponds to rodent ectoparasites. Here I'm thinking about fleas and ticks. And indeed, when you use rat-killing methods, fleas that live in the fur of rodents will leave the dead rodents' bodies and immediately look for other warm-blooded hosts. And in cities, where promiscuity between rats and humans is extremely high, the closest host may often be people themselves. This is why desinsectization should always accompany massive deratization campaigns, especially in cities. For instance, we know of plague and typhus epidemics that were triggered by rat killing without insect killing campaigns. In Peru, in La Réunion, French Islands, and there are many examples of that kind. And this is important to keep in mind when implementing rat killing control, especially in cities where rats and rodents are all together. And to conclude, well, it appears obvious that many opportunities probably exist to implement EBRM in cities. Actually, I like this example in Benin, where voodoo culture, you know, fetish culture is omnipresent, and where a fetish was installed in a where inhabitants used to throw their garbage, and that was on the way to school for kids. And once the fetish was set up, everybody stopped throwing away garbage. So that kind of thing of cultural view and perception of the environment can be used to help in implement EBRM. But on a more general manner, each context will be specific, and each EBRM attempt will require specific and locally adapted strategies in order to fit to available resources, as well as existing environmental and socio-economic constraints. And in cities, these can be a bit tricky to perceive and to calculate, evaluate. But urban EBRM as a whole remains to be tested in the real life. And this is a reason why, together with the Meta and a panel of academic, operational, and community representing partners, we have just started the SCARIA project. Got the logo here, very nice logo coming from Meta staff actually, which aims at gathering researchers and inhabitants to co-construct and test EBRM strategies in 4 pilot urban settings from Niger, Benin, Ethiopia, and Madagascar. And to my knowledge, this is one of the first attempts to do such a thing in cities, at least in Africa. Thanks a lot. And this is a picture of Laji in Benin, where this is one of the 4 pilot sites of SCARIA. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Gauthier. That was a very interesting presentation. Also, that last point you mentioned, I found that really interesting, how they put up the fetish in an area and that prevented further littering in the area. Also, Luika, in your presentation, you made a reference to the cultural context of dealing with this issue. So it's interesting that this came up in both presentations. But yeah, for those who have a bit more time to stick around, I think it would still be good to address a few of the questions we've received in the chat box throughout the presentations. So I'll just address this to our speakers, and then I'll leave it up to you guys to see how to respond, if you all want to respond or pass on the question. So let's see, the first question we received was about the type of rodent that's being targeted. So in one of the images in your presentation, Luika, it looks like it was actually a shrew. And yeah.
Wrong picture. I think Butcher is obviously right, but I do think that at least the field work that we did both in Ethiopia and Nepal, actually also during trapping exercises, we also encountered a lot of shrews, which are indeed other species. So I do think it's really important point. I think that also this should be considered in your management strategy. You have to actually deal with that as well, as you don't, I mean, you only want to reduce the carrying capacity for the pest species and actually improve, let's say, biodiversity. So yeah, Gauthier, please add, because I'm sure, yeah.
Well,
you know,
actually, I think shrews are a nice example of what some of the difficulties we have when we want to implement rodent control, because as you all know, they eat insects, so they can get rid of many other pests. And as far as I know, they don't damage crops or food stocks. But they will probably be sensitive to all the methods that are implemented during EBRM. So, you know, it's a part of what can we target, what is the range of what we can afford to wrongly target, and what are the benefits against the losses. So they are, to me, emblematic. In cities, for example, they are the second species we caught after black rats, and they represent 1/4 of our captures. and people just they know them, they get confused by all the rodents. They say rodents for everyone, and then the shrews are different, but they think they are altogether pests, which is maybe not really the case. Where pests in terms of health, they are, but not pests in terms of socioeconomic constraints.
Yeah, I can see Mehreta would also like to add something in here.
Yes, I think Gauthier mentioned it. Especially in Ethiopian context, they are not pests, and taxonomically they don't belong to rodents. They are in a different group, so they are insectivores. So we don't consider them as rodents. But in areas where they are problematic in terms of health, in terms of ectoparasites, endoparasites, and so on, they can be targeted as part of the control mechanism. But in agricultural context, I think that was what Ambrose was mentioning. In the agricultural context, we cannot consider them as a pest, and we should be very careful not to target them. And I'm saying this because in addition to not being a pest, they have also the advantage of we have done this in northern Ethiopia, and we know that in areas where shrews are abundant, you don't find a lot of rodents, because shrews, they actually eat them. They eat rodents, especially they eat juveniles. They go into the burrows and they eat juveniles. So they are really it's not one and two. I think Ambrose, you can also add your experience in West Africa, but they are really they hunt embryos, the young babies of rodents.
So that's really interesting then. That not everything with small hands and feet and long teeth in the front is necessarily a rodent pest. But I think that raises an interesting question.
Sorry, Jane, I forgot. Sorry, I mentioned. Just sure. I think when we say rodents, they really cover a lot of animals, including porcupines, for example. They are part of the rodents, and they are also pests. In some places, porcupines are also pests because they eat vegetables and so on. But mainly, when we are talking about rodent control, rodent pests in agricultural situation, we are talking about rats and mice, and we ignore squirrels, we ignore, as I said, porcupines and others. So just to make it clear.
Yeah, no, that's clear to me. But then the question is, when you're having these large rodent management campaigns, for example, like the ones we did in Ethiopia, are there any measures you can take, any maybe awareness raising or educational campaigns you can combine with that, just so that we avoid the collateral damage on these actually quite useful species?
Others can also complement. I think, as far as I know, in almost all over the world, these animals are not targeted. They are really left for the farmers. The main focus, even the biorodent, the chemical anticoagulants are also focusing on rats and mice, and they neglect. For instance, in South Ethiopia, probably in Arba Minch, where also in Tanzania, where fruits are grown, mangoes, bananas, avocados, and so on. Squirrels are the most difficult pest rodents, and if you go there, I was there many times. They're asking for traps which can capture squirrels. They say rodents, these are not that problems. They are only problems in maize fields. In fruit and horticultural conditions, squirrels are the problem. So they are asking for squirrel traps because they don't want to use poison. Apparently, they are organic farmers and they are not allowed to use pesticides. So they try to avoid chemical rodenticides, and they are asking for squirrel traps, which are really difficult to find. They are not very commonly available in local markets, and also expensive if you buy them from companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And in fact, in the chat we had another question about other non-target species. This was specifically about trapping rabbits within a trap barrier system. So do you think some of the methods we're developing for rodents here can be applicable to other sorts of pests? I mean, of course, rabbits are not rodents, right? but maybe they also share some of the same behavioral patterns as rodents.
Lubiki, do you want to address or should I?
I think you go ahead.
Okay, so trap barrier system are only used for small rodents, rats and mice, and we cannot use them for rabbits, unfortunately, because they are big in size. They can actually destroy the barrier system itself. And also, we don't have a multiple rabbit capture traps yet, so it's very difficult to use. It has never been tested in other animals other than rats and mice.
Okay, so sorry about that, Francesco. You need another solution for the rabbits on your farm.
Maybe a rabbit could be hunted. Are they eaten by people?
Yes, they are eaten, but they are way too many. So yeah, I was very curious about this fencing system with holes and traps, but maybe we can try it. Let's see. But
which places are you talking about?
I'm talking Spain.
Spain.
Yeah, central Spain. There is so many rabbits right now. But yeah, they can. I mean, we have dogs that chase and kill them, but that's not enough. So yeah, looking for something.
I think for now, Francesco, you might have to stick to more traditional techniques for that.
Yeah.
What other questions did we receive? Yeah, so a question about the biorodenticides. So we have some questions in the chat asking about its effect on predators and scavengers. So in your presentation, Meheretu, I saw that the biorodenticide was tested on non-target species. You mentioned chickens and guinea pigs. But what about in other animals that would consume these rodents? Does the biorodenticide degrade or does it bioaccumulate? Have we looked into this?
Unfortunately, we haven't looked at on predators. I was thinking about it. How can we do it methodologically? It will be very challenging to feed a predator and then look at maybe internal organs and blood system if there are some accumulation of ingredients of the biorodenticide. But we did it on chicken and guinea pigs, and so when we did it with rodents, we checked organs, liver, spleen, heart, and also the guts, the entire digestive system. We checked which part of the organ is being affected, and then if the digestive system is also affected. So we know the liver and the heart are the two mostly affected parts of the organ. And of course, there's also some problems, constriction, loss of absorption in the gut. So we tested exactly the same organs for the chicken and guinea pigs to understand that if the same effect can also be, for instance, observed in predators, for instance, which have consumed the rats. And all our results, all the chicken and the guinea pig experiment, they show that no problem on the liver, no problem on the heart. The gut was smooth, full of food. We haven't seen. Apparently, none of our test animals, chicken, pigs, died when we did the non-target species test. So we thought that in general, these biorodenticides have almost no effect on non-target species. Particularly, I can say particularly the chicken and guinea fowls. We assume that the chicken demonstrate a domestic animal, and the guinea pig, let's say, as a wild species. But I admit that it would be interesting for future if we can look at the impact on predator species.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would definitely be a challenging experimental setup, but yeah, could reveal some interesting information about that. We also have a question on the same topic from Gautier. Yeah, about the risk of building resistance in rodents. Did I read this correctly?
Yeah. And I think I took it. I mean, another very interesting question. Research application in the future, I think Gautier mentioned. I think one area of research of interest would be really identifying all the active ingredients from the plants. I mean, all the active ingredients, possibly active ingredients, should be identified one by one. That this could be one area of research, maybe for a master's student. And then I also mentioned about the synergetic effect. For our biorodenticides, we are using 2 different plant species, and we don't know how the active ingredient of one counteracts or works together synergetically with the other one. So this is also another interest, and of course resistance is very important. As long as through time, when the biodenticide is used by generations of rodents, and then there is a possibility of developing resistance. Usually the science says that the resistance from biodenticide is very minimal compared to chemical rodenticides, but it's not, it should be investigated. Another area is the environmental harm. I mean, we tested it in a very small scale, but I think in large scale, variety of soil, variety of environmental conditions, and so on, this should also be done, and this can be considered as areas of future research. With that, did I answer your question?
Yeah. From my side, I feel like that is answered. If anyone in the audience has any further questions about this, you can send them in the chat. I think that's been covered quite extensively. I can see Gautier is raising his hand. So
yes. Thanks. Still about resistance. Not really resistant actually, but usually traditional drugs or poisons are difficult to reproduce because they are a mixture of molecules, active molecules, whatever it's from within the same plant or different plants or animals. But how do you manage to have the same quantities, both absolute and relative amount of synergetic molecules when you produce your biorodenticide? How do you know that the plants contain, the plants at the same, because I guess maybe the molecules inside just vary in quantity during their development, or how do you ensure that you have the same amount of active molecules each time you produce it? So how do you ensure that they are always efficient the same way, quantitatively? That must be quite tricky.
Yes, indeed, it's very tricky, but I think we are using quality testing. So we do quality testing like part of shelf life. But I think the most important part of the answering your question is targeting the plant sources. For instance, if you are using a leaf, I'm giving an example, a leaf of a given plant, the amount of active ingredient in a leaf, matured leaf and fresh leaf could be different. So these are the things, and while we are really playing with sourcing the plant, and the source of the plant is the one which determines. Otherwise, we measure air dry powder amount of each plant material to make it as much as possible. The concentrations from the 2 plants cannot be imbalanced, to make them balanced. And then of course doing the tests now and then, as soon as one product the material is produced by the SMEs or the women group, then we do the testing, and we try to guide them that, okay, this is how you have to combine the 2 plants so that the synergetic effects of the active ingredients of the 2 plants cannot be lost.
Yeah.
So, okay.
No, maybe if I can quickly add, still can get your question, Gautier. I think three things are important. Indeed, it's very tricky because in the lab it worked that way, and obviously we do this quality control. But yeah, you want to be certain that this effect will be there in all the circumstances with all your products. So one thing we're also looking into is types of cultivation. If they're wild, endemic plants, or see if any type of cultivation is possible. So you can also put, the same harvesting period, the same maturation, to be at least more certain that you get the same molecules and components. But it's really part of the investigation we are doing. And the second part is to make sure the protocols are the same and all the SMEs produce it really the same way. So also the same drying time, the same type of drying, so in the shade, not in the sun, etc. All these things to make sure they're really, the same everywhere, and the quality control with samples from the different SMEs that produce it. But it's under investigation,
But I mean, as far as you control its efficiency, each time you produce, quantities, that's all okay. But if you want to upscale it, maybe there will be needs to understand which exact stage of the plant maturation development is needed, and what quantity of the active molecules, as you were saying.
I think up to date, actually, the most, the difficulty in this has been that the plants are too unknown to actually get a laboratory analysis done to really understand the active ingredients. That has been the major hiccup. I mean, if we would know that critical we would have that critical information, we could undertake steps in terms of how to extract, etc. But it's really difficult to find that out for our plant species.
Do you mean you want to have contacts with the people involved in that kind of research, or?
Well, we have contacted some, but if you know people who are really good, please share the contacts. Yes.
Oh yeah. I've got some colleagues in Benin working on that kind of things, trying to understand how to produce natural rodenticides, insecticides, or whatever.
Yeah, please, much appreciated.
We can share that. Yeah, sure, pleasure.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And I think this would be an important next step, just like we've invested the time and resources into studying the rodent ecology. Now it's important that we also understand that the plants that we're using to fight these rodents. Now I can see, of course, we've gone over time, but I think for those who are still with us, maybe we can just take another 5 minutes, and I'd like to give the presenters a chance to talk about what's in the pipeline for this sort of rodent management. So they mentioned a few ongoing and upcoming projects, but now I'll just give you a few minutes to talk about what lies in the future for rodent management with Meta and also your own personal work at the moment.
Let me very quickly share a few things. I think, first of all, didn't mention during the presentation, but we're very happy that we had won the Olam Food Prize for 2021. That's really a nice encouragement, and also gives us the opportunity to scale up our practices to other countries, but also keep innovating this biodenticide and expand our research and innovation on that. That's the important thing what we want to do in the future. Also looking more towards Asian countries, myself currently living in Nepal, looking at Nepal and India specifically. And we have recently a project for the EU was awarded to us in the Mediterranean countries, so Greece, Cyprus, Morocco, Turkey. So we also really happy to get into EBRM and novel rodent management in those countries for the EU context. That's from my side. But looking forward also to get suggestions from your side. If there's anything we should work in, please let us know.
Yeah, thanks for that, Luika. Mehretu, Gauthier, would you like to add something?
Mehretu, please go ahead.
Please go ahead.
All right. As far as we are concerned, well, I talked a bit briefly about the Skya project, which is actually starting because it took some. It's a bit late because of admin procedures as usual. So the idea is to settle, working groups with academics and representatives of the local communities in these 4 cities from 4 countries I was talking about. And we are actually it's working slowly but quite well because. At least in 2 countries, we've already made some first steps towards having people involved, happy to work with us, think and meet the academics and talk about all these problems. And we recently learned that we would have a PhD bursary for a student in Niger that will lead the process there. Mary too has been to Niger to share its experience Ethiopian with the Nigerian colleagues, and they were extremely happy and stimulated by you coming there, Mary too. And then hopefully it's going to go to nice things. And I don't know if Ambroise is still, yes, he's still online, and I know he's trying also to expand and work with Meta on the rural aspect. I'm much more on the urban ones, but Ambroise, maybe you can just say a few words on what is happening in Senegal, for example.
Yes, sorry. I have to leave the...
Are you still in
I'm
the train?
still in the train. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's no problem. It's just to try to find a place.
Moving a lot.
Yeah, sorry. I was just in the wagon with everybody. We started some focus group discussions in Senegal, in the Delta of Senegal, rural Senegal, in rural settings. So that is basically an adaptation of the questionnaires interviews set up by Ethiopian colleagues, and then adapted to the West African rural framework settings, and so it's going quite well until the end of December, and with nice patterns emerging. So this was the first step to try to know the knowledge, attitude, and practices of farmers before implementing more operational research that will come, hopefully. And we are, for instance, thinking about the trap bias system and the bags into the storage methods. And so if we will look forward, if we can manage to have Retu coming also to Senegal, that will improve a lot the second step, which is going into practice in experimental setup with the farmers. But we are first at the first stage, that is to try to discuss and make, to see what are the problems for the farmers. Something that's been interesting. We were focusing first on rice, and then we saw that also in the garden marketing things, there are problems, and that will be a different context. So we'll talk later about that. So we lean long.
Perfect. Great. Thank you very much for that. And just before we close this off, Mehretu, you have a minute or two.
Yeah, just to add a few things on what Luiki has mentioned. I think going forward, we have to really answer some of the very interesting questions that you have raised in this webinar. The bioactive issue, the resistance issue, environmental harm issues should be answered. I think this will be part of our future research work. And still there are some marketing and production issues that you need to answer. Ambrose also was asking about official listing of the biorodenticides. That is not yet done. It's in the process, so that will also be part of our future work. I think, as mentioned already by Gutier and Luigi, also in addition to agriculture, we want to focus on rodent problems related with public health. So we will be moving also towards addressing health issues related with rodents, identification of pathogens transmitted from rodents to humans, and ectoparasites and endoparasites as well. So the spectrum of our research on rodents will also cover health issues. We are also working on recent proposals on technology innovations, sensory technologies for studying and understanding rodent behavior and activities in more details by using many sensory technologies. And I think this is the way forward. I mean, we cannot really depend on catching rodents and studying them or putting them in the lab. There are many ways of studying rodents in the field. As restrictions are becoming very tighter on getting ethical permission for working rodents in the lab, it's mandatory to design some new technologies to study them in the wild. So this is also an area of research that we are going to endeavor in the coming years and months. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So lots of exciting developments in the present and a few more ahead in the future. Good. So I think we've taken as much time as we possibly could. I'd just like to thank all of the speakers for taking the time today to share their experience and knowledge with us, and also for all the participants to starting off your day with this really complex but also important and cross-cutting issue of rodent pests in both rural and urban settings. Yeah, so many of you that registered for this webinar, well, 100% of the people who registered selected yes, that they would like to receive the Rodent Green newsletter. So you're now subscribed for that mailing list, and we'll keep you up to date with any developments that community of practice develops. Also, you'll receive an email with a link with the recording to this webinar with a short write-up about it that will be hosted on the Water channel, which is run and managed by Meta. So all of this will be available on there probably within the next week. And yeah, if you have any questions for any of us, for the speakers or anything, you've got our contact details from the invitation, so just feel free to reach out. And I think that's everything. So thank you once again for everything.
Thanks a lot to everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Tati.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye, you too.
Okay.